Great, thank you, Dina. Hi, everyone.
She's got the speed and the range and everything.
Really religious, we're very secular.
It
Very
feels
similar
more
to
like driving a
just
real car.
Yeah, I like that idea. Go ahead.
How did that happen? I'm sorry.
Hi, everyone. Hey, book club. Welcome, welcome. If you could please mute yourselves, that would be great.
Very strange.
I can't do it this time because this is an institutional meeting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna mute everyone, and then I will unmute people.
That really wasn't what. And then I'll.
Great, okay. So thank you for your patience. We're just gonna give it a couple of minutes to make sure everybody is getting in. Thank you for joining us, and thank you especially to Dalia for joining us for this conversation. Dalia, can you wave so people can see where you are? Great, and here, I'm gonna, yes, good, you unmuted yourself. Do you wanna say hi? Oh, sorry, you're still muted. Let me see. I'm new to hosting. Okay, I think you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me and also for taking part of this lovely afternoon to be together and talk. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great. I'm gonna say we can get started. People are still trickling in, but we've got a majority. So Rachel, do you want to talk us through the structure for this meeting? Oh, sorry, I was trying to unmute you at the same time you unmuted yourself. There we go.
Both clicked it at the same time. So hello, everyone. Welcome. Dalia, hi. I'm the CEO and publisher of The Forward. We are so excited that you could be with us today. And book club members, we're so happy that you could join us for a conversation with the author of this fascinating book that we so enjoyed reading and discussing. We've collected some of your questions through email, but please feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. Talia, you all know Talia, our innovation editor, formerly deputy culture editor, lifelong book lover, is going to be leading the discussion. Hannah and I may jump in here or there, but it's most going to be Talia with Dalia. And then Talia will be, directing traffic. And I also may just kind of step in and try to make sure that we're all, speaking in a way that is constructive and connected. If you would like to put in the chat before we get to asking questions, if you would just like to put in the chat where you are joining us from today, that would be great. I'm in Montclair, New Jersey, as usual, forever, perennially. It seems like never ending. Oh, and we have one other staffer from The Forward with us today, in addition to Talia and, of course, Hannah Pollack, our archivist. I almost said activist. We have also Benjamin Cohen, whose photo you can see, and he is our news director and also oversees our social media and analytics division. There he is. Benjamin is also an author. Maybe we'll get to his book in a few sessions. So I will stop talking. I will let Talia take over and begin the conversation with Dalia, and we're just looking forward to experiencing it.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. So just a few words on top of that. I'm gonna plan on asking Dalia a couple questions, then I'll turn it over to Rachel, Hannah, and Malka, see if they have thoughts. And then we'll be opening it up to the group. When it comes time to open it up to the group, we'll ask you to raise your hand by clicking the participants icon at the bottom of your screen. Once you open that, there's an icon that says raise hand at the bottom of that. We will also have people monitoring the chat in case that's needed. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And again, thank you for joining us. So Dalia, we enjoyed. Oh yes.
My screen is frozen, so you guys can hear me? Because
yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Nothing's moving on my screen, so I'm wondering. Okay.
I'm so sorry it's frozen. We all know what it's like to have that situation with Zoom, so no worries.
The sound is working, it's okay.
Good, and hopefully it gets unfrozen soon. So the overwhelmingly most significant question that everyone had about this book is, where did Hamid come from? This completely indelible, very uh, sort of disruptive, disturbing character. How did he come to you?
So Hamid really came to me as a voice, and I'm not exaggerating that. It was a summer afternoon. I was very kind of antsy and restless, and I just really heard him, and he was relentless and exasperating and sort of, and what he ended up being as a character, I think, in the book. And I just went with it. I just felt like it was stronger than anything. I had been working on other stuff for, after the first book, I'd been working on a lot of other things, and nothing was coming this strongly. And I just believed in it. So I just went with it. But in retrospect, I think he came from a place of, I don't know what the right word is, but maybe somewhat dissatisfaction in me. I felt a little bit trapped, maybe. I felt trapped in the West. And it suddenly had occurred to me that everything I know and everything I've learned and everything I think has been shaped by Western education and a Western narrative. Not everything, but a lot of it. I was, even before the revolution, I was in a French school in Iran. After the revolution, that changed. So the curriculum changed, of course. But then when I came here, again, I was in a French school, then I went to American universities, et cetera, and then I've mostly lived here. So, and then I suddenly thought, I'm just sort of tired of this side. And what if I'm looking at things from a completely different lens, from the perspective of somebody who was in the revolution, who participated in it, who ended up working inside the government? What would that be like? And I think that was sort of the driving force for me. That's where he came from.
That's really fascinating. Thank you. So I'm curious, in some ways, that's quite a transgressive thing to do, is to imagine the other side of this event that ruptured your own life. I'm curious about what parts of the process of writing him and writing his story challenged you the most, and maybe what you learned from that.
Well, I think the part where he actually starts, the childhood was easy, he's a sweet child, he's sensitive, it was sort of the part, and I'm assuming most people have read the book, so I'm not giving anything away, right? From the moment where he betrays his father and everything he does after that. So for me to sort of really understand I kind of knew that this is what he's gonna do, but for me to understand why he's doing these things. And in the end, I think I was able to manage it as best I could by understanding that this is somebody who's making wrong turns, one after the other, and he's just getting trapped in a system, and he's having more and more difficulty extracting himself from his situation. So it's just somebody who's going deeper and deeper and deeper. Yeah, and that's how but it was challenging to justify, sort of, even to himself, what he's doing.
Yeah. And for you personally, what was the emotional effect like for you of spending so much time with this character who's being trapped and sucked in this way?
I don't know. There was an energy to this book that I was very sort of drawn to, and it was giving me a kind of life force. So it was difficult on some level, but on some level I can't say I was enjoying it, because it's not enjoyable, but I was alive, I just kind of felt him. And so it was difficult, but it wasn't all negative, there was this life force underneath it, and I could really feel it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. I'm curious, when you finished the book, did his voice leave your head, or do you still have him there sometimes?
I still have him sometimes. Yeah, he hangs around. He's a tough character. But I think we're friends. We're sort of friends.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
nice. So I'm going to pivot away from the character for a moment. I'm sure we will be coming back to him. There's so much fascination there. But I'm curious, both this and your first novel are very centered on Iran. And obviously, the Forge is a Jewish publication. This is a very Jewish group. And Iran is a place that, in the sort of broad American Jewish imagination, is often framed as being kind of an enemy or a very complicated subject. So I'm curious about how you, as a Jew working in Jewish spaces, navigating Jewish spaces, see this sort of complexity playing out in your work and in your readers' reactions.
I'm so sorry, my screen froze, so I missed the last part of your question.
Yeah, I'll just briefly do it again. So your books are very centered on Iran, which is a place that, in the broad American Jewish narrative, is, you know, quite a complex and difficult subject, and often framed as an enemy. So I'm curious about how you have sort of found yourself processing that in your own work, and as you engage with Jewish writers or Jewish readers, apologies, in Jewish spaces, how you see that sort of complexity playing out.
Well, Iran is a complex place, and the Iranian Jewish community is complex. So I think I've always been drawn to that complexity. In the first book, obviously, the family is Jewish, so it's more directly centered on a Jewish story. Although, again, I was very careful to not make it a Jewish persecution story. It was not that. And this is why in the first book, for those who don't know it, it's a story of an Iranian Jewish man who's imprisoned in the immediate aftermath of the revolution, along with many others. So I made sure in that book to put him in a communal jail, so that it's clear that all sorts of people were being arrested at that time for all kinds of reasons. In this book, there isn't really a Jewish narrative, just because, I mean, there is a little bit, a sort of sub-story. Hamid, just sort of, you know, that voice that came to me wasn't about that this time. However, I did include a secondary character who's Jewish, so his girlfriend from the time of the revolution. And again, initially that was just organic. She came to me as this character and I wrote her. But I think, again, in retrospect, I wanted to point out that a lot of Iranian Jews participated in the revolution, which may seem sort of odd for an American audience, but they did. There was a Jewish organization, you know, specifically that was, you know, a revolutionary organization. And for example, the Jewish hospital called Sapir ended up treating a lot of the revolutionaries at a time when the other hospitals would turn them into the government, you know, as they were being wounded by the Shah's army. So they played a seminal role in the revolution. And it wasn't a monolithic society. You had Marxists, you had liberal Democrats, you had all kinds of, you know, you have more religious people. So I, again, that little character was an attempt to show that Jews participated in the revolution. And it's not so black and white. I think for a lot of Iranian Jews, especially those who have remained, being Iranian is first and being Jewish is sort of second. The nationality, the sort of nationality aspect of it is very, very prominent. So yeah, but of course, Jews have a long, you know, difficult and sometimes very good history in Iran. And I explored some of that, more of that in the first book. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and give them a shot at it. So you said at the start that part of what brought you to this character in this book was this feeling of being sort of a bit tired of the Western experience and wanting to look back to the other side. I'm curious, on the other end of having written this book, um, where you are with that now. Has it changed the way that you see the world? Has it changed the way that you see your own experience? Are there new questions you have that writing this book helped introduce you to? All of that.
I think it, well, certainly changed my perception of the revolution itself, which, you know, I sort of subscribed before this to the more common idea that it was really driven by liberal democracy, and it was sort of hijacked by the clerics at the last minute. And I realized more and more that that wasn't the case, that the sort of secular versus religious debate wasn't the primary debate. It was really a democratic society, but not necessarily as we see, you know, not necessarily as a Western democracy. The point was everybody agreed they wanted to get rid of the monarchy, and religion was seen by some, not all, as a very viable vehicle toward that kind of social justice. It's a different sort of concept of religion. It's of Shiism in particular. It's a religion that's very socially active, that's not sort of in cahoots with the kings, as has been the tradition for a long time. You know, the clerics would kind of cohabitate with the kings in order to get by. So this was a very proactive type of religion. And for many, it was viewed as a viable vehicle toward achieving social justice. So my view of that narrative changed. I realized it's not so binary, it's a lot more complex than that. And then another question, and I sort of explored this briefly in the book, where I have somebody writing a book within the book about his uncle's experience and how the book is hailed, and you know, everybody says it's a wonderful book. There was something that I wanted to point to, the sort of industry then that has risen, you know, of those who have been aggrieved by Iran, and a lot of it is true. It's not that it's lie, but there is also a whole commerce taking place, you know, behind that kind of narrative, and I am part of that commerce. So I, you know, with my first book, so I'm not specifically judging anybody. I'm just pointing something out that even if something is true, it doesn't take away that sort of Western commercials, particularly American commercialization, if you like, of that narrative. So that's another thing I wanted to explore. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn it over to Rachel. Rachel, do you have a couple questions for Dalia?
I do. So thank you, Talia. I have to say, Dalia, the discussion around this book was so lively. I mean, the book club was really just like, you know, it was like compulsively readable. It was that thing where people couldn't stop talking about the character and his decisions. And it was really, Hamid was just such a, I mean, it was such an interesting experience to just sort of go along with him in his life. And so I'm trying not to make all the questions about him, but you know, I have to ask a couple. So it was very interesting to hear you describe him and start off with him being a sweet child and, you know, a sort of his fragility and, you know, his sensitivity, because those were very clear. And we have a couple of reader questions that I'll get to. But even with that, the balance of his life as an adult I think, led the group to just in general to discuss him as a villain, really just as a bad guy. And all of the reasons for him becoming the way he did were painful. You definitely rendered them really vividly. But there was an assumption in the group, everyone was like, yeah, and he's a bad guy. And it ranged from weak to actually kind of evil. And I'm just curious if you think of him when you were writing him, I guess, were you thinking of him as an opportunist? Were you thinking of him as somebody who just got lost and sucked in, or that he changed over time? I guess, how do you think about him?
I thought of him as somebody who is, well, even in his youth, he vacillates a lot. So even during the revolution, he keeps changing philosophies. He goes from one thing to another. He joins this group, then that group. He's sort of somebody who's not able to stick to a core. And so he vacillates. So I thought of him as somebody who's lost. That doesn't mean that I'm whitewashing him. He does some terrible things. But I didn't think of him as evil. Like if you contrast him to somebody like Akbari, he's sort of the guy who draws him into all this. That guy to me is more of an opportunist who's just in it for himself and his power. In Hamid, especially initially, he had some idealism that he still believed that they could change the government and that maybe he was doing some good because he could release some people from inside and he had more power inside than outside. Which even now, even in this country, you hear with the previous administration, some people making such arguments. So it's not, unheard of. And the fact that he constantly interrogates himself. So I've said this often, that he's an interrogator, but he's more essentially a self-interrogator. Meant to me that he's not just somebody who does things without questioning himself. He does constantly question himself. So he was complex to me. He wasn't, this or the other.
That's interesting. And as you're discussing it, I can inhabit what you're saying. Like it makes sense to me. But he does have that one, the one inflection point where he turns his father in. And so there was so much discussion around that sin. And I'm very curious about what you imagined was happening internally, because he doesn't really make it explicit. You screwed me, so I'm going to screw you. You were a terrible dad, so I'm turning you in. You do the reader the honor of respecting complexity. But I'm just curious about how you thought about it, because really that scene and that moment took up a lot of attention. So I would just love to hear you talk about it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, so the father also is a complex character. I didn't want to have a terrible father and then, have it be like, oh, well, look what a terrible father does. He creates this kind of son. So the father is also complicated. He's not the warmest father, but he can be quite kind and, so it was for me a moment of, when he runs into Akbari, when his car is stalled and he's sweating and he has all those chickens in the back and he's shopping for his family. He's feeling a little bit powerless. And so Akbari shows up and he's sort of missing that kind of, the machismo of those days when he felt like a true revolutionary. And so it's kind of a thoughtless act that has tremendous consequences that he only realizes later. And actually, when Akbari knocks on the door, he kind of is in disbelief that the guy really showed up and it's going to happen. it's a thoughtless act that an adolescent act. He's quite young at the time. And he just wants to, show off. Because also Akbari says, I thought somebody like you would have left by now. And so he's trying to show off.
I just, I mean, you're the author, so obviously you really know what's going on, but I want to echo back that thoughtlessness of adolescence, the not understanding the impact of your actions, the not believing that you inhabit a role that can have such an impact on the world around you, really was so effectively captured, I thought, in the way he behaved. It was like, nobody's gonna listen to me. I'll tell the guy, but obviously he's not gonna show up. Oh my God, he's here. And it's like, yeah. Your actions have consequences, which is something that is, teenagers learn over time, and you wonder if there will ever be revolutions without teenagers. I just thought that was really an interesting way of doing it and really insightful. So let me see what else I have on my list of questions. I guess related, I would say we had a couple of questions from readers that were very similar, and they were around, did you know someone like Hamid? I mean, is he drawn from, I know he appeared in your head and you kind of knew him, but did you really know someone like him, or pieces of him, or, how much is he drawn from life?
No, I don't know. And he's a first person narrator. He's not me. No, I don't know. I mean, some of the other characters are drawn from real, for example, the minister, is based on actual, real character. But no, Hamid is not. He's not. I can't explain him.
I mean, it's really interesting because he is so vividly drawn, and there are those moments that so perfectly capture, what a real person would do, that I think a lot of people were like, well, she must know somebody like him. She must have been inspired by someone whose actions puzzled her because he stayed behind and he betrayed his family. He must be drawn from life, but no. So let's see, what else did we have? This is interesting. I'm not sure how deeply you can engage with it, but there's just a question of why was the father so mean? Why was he, and you already said, well, he was sort of nice sometimes, but there was a question of how could he be so mean to his child? So.
Well, I think of him as more as a disciplinarian. He's, a certain kind of father. And also he's somebody who is afraid of chaos. So he's doing this encyclopedia. He's trying to contain things, to categorize, to organize, even though he's aware that the world is a mess. He's looking for origins of things. So he's always looking for the oldest, type of thing that existed, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tablets. But at the same time, he knows he can't contain things, but, so his son is sort of not falling into the, falling in line, so to speak, and he frustrates him. At the same time, I think, they kind of reflect each other. So when one is sleepless, when Hamid is a boy, the other one is sleepless, they sit together in the kitchen. One is drawing, the other one is reading. There's this kind of connection between them that, and Hamid in some ways starts to repeat his father's actions, in life to a much greater level.
Yeah. We just got a comment that said part of the poignancy of the book is the mounting evidence that the father really loved Hamid and wanted to connect in some way. And interesting, that fear of chaos just captures it really well. I just have a very random question, and it is, were you thinking of The Little Prince when you were talking about how a hat was the drawing of the uncle?
Oh, that's interesting. That's so interesting. Not sort of consciously, but that was a favorite book of mine when I was a kid. So maybe.
It was very, of course, it was extremely charming and wonderful, and the father couldn't appreciate it. How could he not appreciate his son's insight into, just for people who haven't read The Little Prince or for whom it's been a while, If I'm recalling correctly, the Little Prince draws a picture of an elephant, but it's inside a snake and it just ends up looking like a hat. And then the pilot thinks it's a hat. It's not a hat, it's an elephant. Anyway. Let's see. I think we got a question in the chat. Can you speak about the uncle story? Oh, there we go. So speaking of the uncle.
The uncle. So the uncle is sort of the only, or one of the only good characters.
Oh, Dalia just froze for a second.
Yes, I think she did.
Maybe she'll come back.
Did I freeze?
You did. You froze for a moment. So you just, we ended at the uncle is one of the only good characters, and then we lost.
So he's one of the purer characters, along with the daughter, of course, and maybe the artist H. The uncle, the uncle is sort of a reflection of some kind of purity, the connection with nature. He's a gardener. He is spiritual. He carries a prayer stone, and there's something just beautiful about the uncle for me. And he just can't fit. He can't fit in this society where there's a lot of, that's based on appearances and manipulation and game playing and so on. He just can't make it, which is why he dies.
I mean, totally. Did he kill himself?
I left that open and I won't answer it. Possible.
I'm going to say yes. That's just my opinion. Okay, so I think I can turn it over to, I could keep talking, but I want to share. So I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Chana Pollack, who is our archivist, who had a couple of questions, I think, about language, but I'll just let Chana speak and I will mute myself now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dalia. I love the book, and I have to say, I feel kind of funny because I feel like I received it almost as a travelogue. There was so much beauty about Iran and the Iranian people in it that I just, I did actually, I went on YouTube and I looked for a Rick Steves travel to Iran, just so I could see more. And some of the discussions, some of the readers, a reader, Celeste, had actually been to Iran, in the club. So I got that going, but I have to say that part of what compelled me, to just really open my heart to this, was also how much Farsi was in the book. So I just wanted to ask you, I think it's unusual for an American publication to have that much with no glossary. I just thought it was incredible, and I just totally worship that. And I want to know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so that was a bit of a tough decision to know how much to put. For me, the dialogue especially, I hear it in Farsi. So because it has a certain rhythm and there's certain jokes or turns of phrases and so on. So I kind of debated how much to put in. I ended up putting a lot, as you say, not all of which come with explanations, but I thought that those that I don't really explain, the reader can look it up or not, and they won't lose anything. And those that were sort of a whole phrase or expression, I did explain, to my editor's urging, especially. But I must say that she was pretty great about letting me get away with this. So I was happy that I was able to do this. And some of it too, the ones that aren't explained, are for the benefit of the Iranian readers, because some of it is funny. So I put in as much as I thought was acceptable.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved it. It made me feel like I was actually on the streets, overhearing conversation. And I just wanted to ask also, as much as I loved all the travel, the motorbike, I felt like I was traveling through Iran, the amount of art, how much art is mentioned in it, I thought about that too, and food. So I was just wondering, and for me, a lot of the times when there was a pause and there was a discussion of a type of food they were having, that was because it's kind of stressful. It's a stressful read. And then there was this beautiful moment where I don't know, it was transcendent, so.
I'm glad. The art was a seminal part of the book, actually, and it was one of the major inspirations for me. there were several shows that I saw in New York that were really sparked something for me about sort of the rise of Iranian modern art. And so I wanted to capture not just these sort of decades of political history, but also decades of cultural history. And so how artists began to understand themselves, like developing their own language in conversation with Western modern art. And so that part was also very intriguing for me to just sort of trace the evolution of that. Yeah, and Hamid is sort of an artist monkey himself, like, so
Totally.
he loves to draw and he doesn't follow that passion, but there is this,
Right.
passion that he has.
So, and I'll just end with, so because I was like obsessed with all these cultural clues I was getting, this beautiful archive in the book, I was like obsessed with the cover. So I was just wondering if you could talk just a little bit about, what the drawing there on the cover kind of means to
So
you.
yeah, the cover is actually by a very famous artist who's no longer living, Ardeshir Mohasses. And he actually had a retrospective at the Age of Society right before he died, I think in 2008. And so he's an artist I've liked very much. He had been doing satires for decades during the Shah and after. Had gotten in trouble many times, but he just has these witty, smart, exquisite drawings. So I kept imagining him on the cover, and when I spoke with my editor, I sent her some images, and normally there is a lot of resistance to what the writer wants. They're always like, okay, thank you. But she was lovely. She said, okay, they contacted his estate. We got the rights and he's on the cover, which I'm thrilled about.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, I guess toss it back to Talia.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah and Rachel, for those great questions, and Dalia for the excellent answers as well. I'm going to ask one more question, and as I do, I just want to invite participants on the call, if you again want to try raising your hand in the participants box or entering questions in the chat. We're going to start incorporating more of your questions now. So while we go through that, I wanted to ask about the title, because there's such an interesting universal kind of vision in the idea man of my time. And I'm curious about when in the process it came to you, how you see it reflecting both the book and like maybe extending beyond the book, etc.
So the title actually came late in the game. And it's the title is taken from the title of an Italian poem by Salvatore Quasimodo. And that poem is really about how man has been engaging with violence since the time of Cain and Abel, but that he can make a sort of different decision and change course. There is that possibility. So I just loved the sound of the title, and I thought the poem was sort of relevant. And also it's sort of Hamid, because it's man of my time and the book is first person. To me, it's sort of Hamid saying, well, I'm a man of my time. So look what, there is a sentence where at the end he says that he hasn't, that he really, his improvement, if you can call it that, is that he recognizes what the world has made of him and what he has made of the world. And so there is this kind of interconnection between the person and the world, that the world is making you who you are, and you're also making the world what it is. So he's saying of himself, I'm a man of my time.
That's really fascinating. And I'm completely going back on my word. I do have one more question I want to ask, which is, you pulled this title from a poem, and it just made me wonder, were there, books, poems, movies, anything that you kept turning to while you were writing this, or that you felt sort of called to you through the process of working on this book?
Something that I kept turning to. I don't know that was true for this. The writer Dalia Sofer was sort of instrumental in how I sort of, especially in the character of the father, so he was sort of influential. I don't know that I went to a specific thing, but there was a lot that was feeding me. Iranian films I sort of watch all the time just to get that sense of because I can't go there or I haven't gone there, to get the sense of the day-to-day and what's happening now. But I can't say that there was a work that I turned to consistently, no.
Yeah, it's still really interesting to hear. You did freeze briefly before you said Danilo Quiche, so I was just wondering if there was anything we missed in that moment.
I don't know.
Don't worry about it. So we have a question from the chat from Robin Miller, which is, what's in store for you next, and are you working on any new projects you can share with us?
I am working on a couple of things. I'm not quite sure, where they're going each. So hopefully, I'll share when it's time. Yes.
We will look forward to that. And then from Peppy Glass, is curious about why Hamid reveals that he betrayed his father at the memorial dinner, what his motivations there are.
I think like most things, they're ambiguous. So it's not one thing or another. There's a part of him that wants to come clean. He's been carrying this forever. There's a part of him that's destructive, as his brother suggests. So there is that part of him too. He could have done it in a different way. He didn't have to do it like that. There is a part of him that's very frustrated with the sort of expat community that's living here and all their affects and the way they carry themselves. And so it's kind of an FU to everybody. It's a mixed bag like everything else.
And then one more question in the chat from Hannah Kramer, which is, do you have a background in psychology, just because of how acute this book is in that way?
I don't, but my sister's a psychologist, so we have long conversations, so that may have something to do with it.
Great. Last call for any other questions from the group. I'm not seeing, okay, Carol asks, can you share the title of the poem you took Man of My Time from again?
It's Man of My Time.
The title is Man of My Time. There we go.
The translation, the Italian is Uomo del mio tempo.
Lovely. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Last call. And if we don't have questions from the readers, I'll just turn it back to Rachel and Hannah in case they have any last questions. Oh, we have from Barbara Stock, asks if you can say more about the daughter's reaction to the public letter and, what you make of that episode.
Well, I think the daughter is trying very hard to have a relationship with him, despite everything he's done, to her. She is in that stage where she's still idealistic. She's quite young, and she tries very hard. But I think at that point, she just comes to a point where she can't understand it. And she also sort of encapsulates this generation, the newer generation that's trapped in that narrative of the revolution, and everything is about that, and they don't care about it anymore. They just want to move on. They want to do their thing. They want to create things. They want to have ideas. But it's sort of this looming thing. So she just, I think, gets exasperated at the end, and she just says, I just don't want anything to do with this anymore. Whether that will stay is sort of up, who knows? But at this point in her life, she can't deal with it.
Great, thank you. Well, Hannah, Rachel, final questions for Dalia?
I'm seeing a couple more in the chat. I don't know if we got to all of them. There's this one that says, if betraying his father was an adolescent impulse, what was almost strangling his daughter? Did we ask that yet? I don't think so.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that one when I was looking over them.
Yeah.
That's cruelty. That's aggression. That's and so he hasn't lived after betraying his father, he's done some terrible things. And so I sort of deliberately didn't depict those because I didn't want these graphic scenes of, the type of narrative that we get a lot in stories of Iran. So I was very deliberate in not including those, but alluding to them. So he's somebody who has done these things, even though he's tried to restrain himself and he's put sort of limits on what he can and can't do. But this is part of his history, and it also is coming to face with his daughter's sexuality, which he can't tolerate at that point. So he just blows a fuse, and it's not acceptable. And even he knows it. That's why he lets his daughter walk out, because he knows there's nothing he can say to defend himself.
It's so interesting because it is a parallel of his own father needing control and fearing chaos, and like the chaos of a young woman's sexuality and what that might mean. And he has no tools to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And it is also interesting that I think, first of all, I just as a reader appreciate the choice you made not to do a sort of, graphic, tactile depiction of violence. I don't think it was necessary for the message of the story. But even evil people aren't evil all the time. They have to eat breakfast and they have to, catch the bus and let somebody, open the door for somebody or whatever. And it's just interesting to see, regular life woven in with plenty of episodes of cruelty. We had other questions in the chat specifically about the mother. I don't think we've spoken much about his mother and her role, which was very absent. Was that intentional? What were your thoughts about creating the character of the mother, of Hamid's mother, not his
wife? Yeah. Well, the mother's sort of from this aristocratic family, and she's very much she's dependent on that sort of persona. She's a composite of a lot of women of that generation that I feel I've known, who are kind of unsatisfied, not fully actualized because of the constraints of society, and not necessarily out of any flaws of their own. So she's sort of in the background because the father too is so sort of dominant as a character and personality. So she steps back, but she's not the kindest woman either. She's of a certain class, and she's sort of married beneath her class, and there are all these issues of class going on. And yeah.
I do think that was one of the other, one of the reasons this book was so absorbing is that there was so much complexity introduced into how the characters related to each other. Everything was overdetermined in terms of how they behaved. And okay, let me get back. So I'll stop deliberating. We have a thank you from Celeste who says, thank you for mentioning Hafiz, Sevra, and the hoopoe bird. There is a question that says the characters were so intellectual. Is this a Persian tradition, a Persian literary tradition? Was this drawn from something other than Dalia Sofer's preferences in writing? Was there some kind of tradition you were drawing on?
Well, there's certainly a certain strand of the society that is very intellectual. And so, yes, that very much exists. But then some of the references are just, references that I like, that I try to work in, which you do as a writer, because that's fun. So I was sort of playing with that.
So it wasn't that we missed like, oh, well, if you read more Persian literature, you would know that the story of the family with the wayward son is a traditional, structure that's happened over the centuries or whatever. There's not some literary tradition that we're missing that you're drawing on.
No, nothing specific that you're missing. No.
I'm sure we're missing a lot, but let's see, are there other questions in here? Fran Friedman says, for you, what is Hamid's most redeeming quality?
Hamid's most redeeming quality is the fact that he keeps questioning himself. So he puts himself on trial. So it's not, and the fact that he doesn't delude himself. So at the end, he knows that there's no sort of this kind of redemption that you want to get in life and in his book. So, but he does recognize what he's done and what he's capable of, and he decides to stop, to sort of shield the world. If he's not necessarily improving, he's going to shield the world from what he's capable of.
To at least stop.
Yeah.
So that clarity of vision turned on himself as well as outward.
Yeah.
We have a question here. How much in your mind does Islam play into Hamid's thinking? Is he totally secular, or as you were creating him?
Yeah, he's not an observant person. He's not a religious man. So he's quite secular, even though he is within that system. He's not a religious man.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that is the end of our chat questions, which is like perfectly timed because we just have a couple of minutes left. So I think we can just say thank you. This was really wonderful. I mean, the experience of reading the book was a gift. It was a gift for all of us. And you being here and discussing it so engagedly is also really just wonderful. It's one of the great things about this job is that this is part of our job. Reading great work and talking to the author and getting to spend time with our book club. So unless there are any final thoughts to share with Dalia, I think we can say thank you and we can talk about next time. I don't think we have a date yet. We don't have a date yet. And by the way, I forgot to introduce our other staffer who's here, Malka Bressler, because I think I didn't realize she was going to be here. And I don't even know if she's still here. But Malka is another forward staffer who will be joining us in the book club. So our book for the next meeting is W.G. Sebald's Austerlitz. We have not yet chosen how we're going to break it up or when we're going to meet, but it will probably be in 3 weeks, probably. I mean, I don't know if that's when Passover is. It depends on when Passover is. That will determine when we meet next. I think it's in like 3 weeks. We'll probably meet after Passover, right? I'm just back of the envelope, like Passover is the 27th and it's already the 12th. It's going to be after Passover. Okay, yeah. Got it.
Can you spell the name of the book?
Yes, I will put it in the chat. It is Austerlitz. Oops, that's Arlene by accident. I don't know why.
We'll be sending out more information by email with the full schedule of readings soon. So just keep an eye on your inbox for that. And as always, all that information will also be available in our Facebook group. So if there's anything else, speak now. But otherwise, Dalia, thank you so much for making the time to join us. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much. It was really, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversation, and I thank everybody for making the time.
Thank you. It was a delight.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.